Hello and welcome to episode 396 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leaks. Damien, what a night out it was on Thursday.
The reason we're laughing is because we've recorded this week's show early in the week. So we've actually recorded it about 6 hours before we were due to do the podcast meetup. And the reason we've done it so early this week is every time I've ever done a meetup or an event, I think I get overexcited in pubs which are really noisy and I lose my voice the next day or two. So I've preempted that and we've recorded early. So we'll talk about how great the podcast meetup was in next week's show, because we'll actually know if anybody turned up or not. So we'll leave that till next week's show.
Okay, with that in mind, the fact that we've got a hell of a lot to do before we do have the podcast meetup, let's crack on with this week's show. And so what have we got coming up?
So this week we've got the usual three pieces. I want to do a piece on something called the endowment effect. So I did a piece last week about the Diderot effect, which a lot of people like. This is another piece of psychology you need to be aware of. And you might not actually be aware that you're being manipulated in some ways by retailers. The other piece I want to do is regarding cash. Now, I regularly do updates on YouTube about the best savings accounts in the UK, and we update articles every week about the best savings rate. And I was asked a question by somebody on there as to whether they can still get 5% interest on their savings, because it seems like the boat on that one might have sailed. So I want to cover that and explain how you can do it. And Andy, finally, you're going to do a piece on...
I'm going to be covering charity at Christmas. Now, I know it's a tough time for a lot of people, and many people can't afford to give to charity at Christmas. So this isn't one of those pieces where we're going to put pressure on people to do that. It's looking at charitable gifts at Christmas and how even people who haven't got the money necessarily or the means to do it can do it and do good for Christmas. Because let's be honest, there's a hell of a lot of waste that goes on at Christmas. People spend a lot of money on tat, and this is just an alternative way that you can do good this Christmas.
Okay, so I'm going to start with the endowment effect first. Now, I did mention retailers and shopping, but this actually has something that's very relevant to investing as well. And the reason it came about this week is because I was changing my 50k portfolio that I run on 80/20 Investor. And in doing so, it can take quite a bit of time for me to make a decision about whether to switch out of a fund or invest in a new fund. And of course, at the moment, we've got a real state of flux in markets. There's been a change in November. If you watched the market update, you'd have heard me talk about it. But there has been that pivot that has caused markets to almost turn on their head. So things that were performing badly up until November now have been the top performers in the last few weeks, and vice versa. So there is an element that when you start to make a decision to invest, you can end up gravitating more towards what you've already got rather than actually exploring new opportunities. And it's that opportunity cost element. Now, that has actually got a name, which is this endowment effect. And I want to talk about it on the podcast because it reaches beyond just investing. So what is the endowment effect? Now, one definition is that it describes how people tend to place greater value on items that they already own, and they put greater value on those than the things that don't belong to them. So that leads to some quite interesting behaviors. Now, I want to give examples of this. So I mentioned their investing. So I'm investing in a particular fund. Let's say it's investing in US equities, and I've held that for a while, and I'm more comfortable holding on to that than actually exploring an opportunity that might be, say, in Asian equities, because I didn't have any exposure to that in my portfolio, for example. So that is something called the endowment effect in action. But there are other instances. Let's say, for example, you bought something and you were going to a football match and you bought tickets to that match but could no longer go. And the endowment effect would be that you would probably not want to sell it at face value, because you'd probably be sitting there thinking, well, I paid X amount for it. It's your ticket to the event that you really wanted to go to. And therefore you put a higher value than is really applicable to it. So you will try and sell that ticket to somebody else, maybe at a higher rate than actually what the face value is of the ticket. So that is the endowment effect in action. It is also why people place higher prices on their own home. So homes are very emotional. So if you ask somebody, how much their home is worth, they will put probably a higher price on it than what an estate agent might do in reality. So that is the endowment effect as well. And we can see it play out in lots of ways. But the issue is, not only do we overprice as sellers, we have a tendency to do that because of that endowment effect, because we value that possession more than one that we don't already own. It could be the same thing, but we want to charge more for it because it's our possession, it's our house. So the ownership part is important in the endowment effect, but there's also something else called loss aversion, which we've touched upon in the past, which plays a part in the endowment effect because we tend to focus more on losses than we do on gains. So people will make decisions that are irrational because they fear loss more than the opportunity cost of something else. So people, for example, will more likely stay in a job they don't like, even if there's another job that's better, because they fear the change, that kind of loss, rather than the opportunity elsewhere. And that again, we see in investing. So people will stay in a losing fund or investment for a very long period of time rather than look to move somewhere else where there could be more potential upside. So that is loss aversion. So that's all linked together. If you want a very good visual example of the endowment effect, think of Gollum in Lord of the Rings, where he's going on about his precious ring. So that is the endowment effect, almost too extreme. Now, it's important because it can be exploited by people as well. So if, for example, you go into a retail environment, there'll be times where you're allowed to take a product home and use it because they know that once they give you that psychological feeling that you own something, then you will place a far greater value on it. So then not only will they be able to seal the deal in terms of a sale, but they'll probably be able to charge you more. So an example is a mattress. So there are companies out there that allow you to take a mattress and sleep on it for months before you can actually give it back. And that is part of the endowment effect. The buy now, pay later phenomenon is part of this as well. By giving you that feeling of ownership, so you can click on a button, have not actually paid for something, you then get ownership of it. Don't forget, you could take it back if you wanted to, if for some reason you didn't want it, but you take ownership of that item. You are now going to pay for it later and probably end up potentially paying more down the long run if you end up paying interest on that debt. But that is the endowment effect as well. So retailers use it to exploit people. You could argue that the test drive of a car is partly that as well. So sometimes you're allowed to take a car home for a weekend and drive around in it as much as you want, because that's the endowment effect as well, because you're feeling like you're owning something, and therefore the loss of that starts to pain you and you place more value on it because it's now, in your theoretical psychological way, your possession, even though it's not. And that's not to say trying things out before you buy them is a bad thing. Of course, that is a positive in some instances. And the reason it's positive is because if you were thinking of buying something, then you actually can find out if you like it or not before you purchase it. So there is a point where, yes, trying something before you buy it is a good thing, but be aware that there is this endowment effect working in the background. They do want you to get excited about it. And the problem in this environment is it can cause you to overspend. So another example in the finance space is you might have a cash bonus that's paid if you don't like the account. Now that happens in some of the switching bonuses, which we've just done a new video actually on YouTube about the best ones at the moment. But there have been instances in the past where once you switch, if you don't like the account in a year, then they will give you a bonus if you move away elsewhere. Again, that's that try before you buy. The fact you've got this bank account, you're less likely, partly because of inertia, but also because if you like it, it's your bank account, you're not going to probably want to change it and alter it. So how do you combat endowment effect? Well, in the investment world, it's important to have a process which is objective. So you're making decisions based on objective numbers. So that's what I do in 80/20 Investor. I don't place reference to the price I bought an investment at. So that means that I don't place emphasis on the loss. If a fund does have a loss, I do switch out of funds that have lost money. So I don't get impacted by loss aversion. I make a decision based upon objective information. And therefore that helps me reduce the impact of that endowment effect on me, because I'm not thinking, well, I've already owned this, I don't really want to get rid of it, even if it's been something that has done quite well for me in the past. It's very difficult, I do admit that, but you've got to have an objective process. I hinted at another tip to avoid the endowment effect, which is only try products that you do have a genuine interest in owning, because it's very easy when you go places that people will go, oh, do you want to try this? And you weren't even thinking about it. It's that kind of serendipity. You suddenly go, oh, I might try this because you're at a Christmas fair and someone says you can try something for free for a period of time. Why not? What have you got to lose? That's using psychology. So if it's something you wanted, then by all means, try it. Try and limit the tryout period. Even if you get an extended period in which to have an object, then maybe only use it for a short period of time before you make your decision. Also, consider the opportunity cost. So by that, I mean that if there is something that you have and you value it more because it's your possession, that is always going to be what the endowment effect does. Then look at the opportunity cost, the things you're missing out on potentially, and try and look at that, because that will make you realize potentially that you are falling foul of this psychological effect. And the other thing is, always try and be aware of the market value of the things that you're looking at. So if it's your house, be aware of what the market value is. Don't fall foul of thinking your house is particularly special, because it isn't. If you're wanting to sell a ticket, for example, that you can't go to an event, be aware of what the face value of that ticket really is. Don't just try and charge more if you want to shift it, that is, just because you can't go and you feel slightly put out about that fact. So as a buyer and a seller, it is worth being aware of what the market price of anything is, because of course, if you're buying something from someone who is falling foul of this endowment effect, then you will be overcharged if you're not aware of what the market value is. So something to be aware of, particularly if you're investing, but particularly in this environment where we're all trying to stop overspending and save a bit of money.
Okay, so moving on to savings then, how to get more than 5% interest.
So as I mentioned in the intro to the podcast, I was asked this question on YouTube about interest rates and whether they have peaked. Now, obviously, what influences savings rates includes the Bank of England base rate and where the market projects that base rate will be in the future. So that has been up and down over the last few months, and we saw savings rates really push up, and we got to the point where you could comfortably get more than 5% on a fixed rate savings bond, particularly if you locked your money away for 5 years. So obviously people are quite excited about that. If you go back just over a year or two, then you would get in a fraction of that on a long-term savings bond. And so we did a piece on the podcast about cash ladders, so you can go and find out if you want ways to be flexible and try and get a higher rate. But what's been going on with savings rates is quite interesting. So to give you a sort of a parallel, if you look at annuity markets, okay, so this is for people out there who are thinking of getting an annuity. If you were 65 and you were looking to buy an annuity just on your life, for £50,000 you would get £3,190 now if you went to an insurance company with your money and wanted to get an annuity. And that figure is per year, of course. So you get that regular income every year. Now, go back to November, that figure was 3,376. Go back to October, it was slightly less at 3,236. Go back to the beginning of the year, it was only 2,292. What I'm trying to illustrate here is annuity rates ratcheted up very quickly after that disastrous mini budget, and now they've started to pull back slightly. And the expectation for the Bank of England base rate, and of course we're including gilt yields, and all of this sort of stuff has started to come back as well. If you look at the mortgage market, then the prediction of where the Bank of England base rate is going to be was way up at 6% at one point, but that has come down to it peaking at 4.5% in the summer of 2023. So that's quite a marked difference, and we started to see some of the fixed rate mortgages start to fall. And if you look at the Money to Masses website, we've done articles on that, and then sign up to the newsletter, you'll see that every week we send out articles about all sorts of things that are going on in the market. So you can do that at moneytothemasses.com/newsletter. So you can get a feel that rates in the market are starting generally to come down. So in savings rates, we're seeing a similar pattern. If you go back to October, the best 1 year fixed rate savings bond you could get, the best rate was 4.75%. Now in December, it's 4.35%. If you looked at the 5 year savings bond, so this is not even 2 months ago, you could get 5.1% a year. Now you can get 4.75%. So they are the best rates in the market as we make this podcast. So you can see there's been a marked decline. So the question is, has the boat sailed? Well, these things are very fluid and they can change, but there is already a sign that the savings rates are starting to drop. Now, I can't guarantee that they're going to keep going down, or in fact, they will go up. But what I wanted to do on the podcast was answer the question. It does date the podcast slightly. Can you get more than 5% on your savings anywhere now? Well, if you look at the fixed rate savings bonds, then no is the answer. You're going to get between 4.3 and 4.75, depending how long you lock your money away, between 1 and 5 years. But it is possible to still get up to 7% on your savings. Now, the way you can do this is by using a combination of regular savings accounts and some high interest current accounts. So it needs a bit of work, but regular savings accounts are those savings accounts whereby you commit to putting a certain amount a month into a savings account, and then they will pay you a high interest rate because of that. Now, of course, it is staggered over the year because you're only putting small regular amounts. You can't put in a lump sum. So if you were to look at the overall return in pounds and pence, it would be nice if you could get over 5% in a fixed rate bond. You can't. So this only really works if you're regularly putting money from, say, your wages aside. If you've got a pot of money elsewhere and you think, well, I could get potentially 5% or more, because that's what you can get, what I'm about to describe, by using some kind of regular savings account. So moving bits of money from another savings account into these regular savers, it doesn't really work because you'd be better off just leaving the lump sum in a fixed rate savings bond. When you do the numbers, you broadly get 5% on the best regular savings accounts. When you do the numbers, that only equates to about 3.5% over the whole sum, if that makes sense. So you'd be better off sticking with a fixed rate savings bond. But of course, you do lock your money away. Now, what are the regular savings accounts out there where you can get more than 5%? So first up, we've got the First Direct regular saver account. That pays 7% now, which is pretty impressive. But because it's a regular saver, you can only put up to £300 a month into the account, and you have to put in at least £25 a month to be able to qualify for that high savings rate. So the good news is, if you don't put £300 in every month, if there's an allowance that rolls over to the next month, you could put in a bit more. So it means there's a total of £3,600 going in a year. That rate of 7% only lasts for 1 year. And of course, if you try and access your money within that year, then you don't get that 7% interest rate. In fact, you will only get a rate that's equivalent to 0.65%. Now, I will link to an article that explains all the T's and C's on some of these accounts that I'm going to mention, because they can be a little bit confusing. So first up, you can put £3,600 into the regular saver with First Direct. Lloyds have an equivalent. They do the Club Lloyds monthly saver. It's got a savings rate of 5.25% and it's paid after 12 months. So if you deposit £400 every month for 12 months, you'll have a balance of £4,926 after the interest is paid. There is a minimum of £25 a month again that you can pay into this. And after 12 months, the account will change to a standard saver account. That's typical, as you'll come to realise, that after a period of time of a year, these accounts tend to revert to a standard savings account with the bank. So already there are 2 accounts there that you can get more than 5% in. There's NatWest do their own version, which is a digital regular saver. That will pay 5.12% AER on balances between £1 and £5,000. Again, we'll put links in the show notes. Barclays have a rainy day saver, which again does 5.12%. And theirs works by paying 5.12% on balances up to £5,000. Then beyond that, you get an interest rate of 0.5%. Now, there are other regular savers out there. 5% seems to be the sweet spot. You can get high interest paying current accounts. So Nationwide have a Flex Direct account that pays 5% on balances up to £1,500. Now, of course, these types of accounts do have some caveats, so check the T's and C's in the article. For example, this one, you can't hold more than 4 existing Nationwide accounts. So children's savers, they always tend to pay at least 5%. So that's another option for people out there looking to save for their children. And one thing I just want to throw out before we finish, don't forget, if you're getting these higher rates of interest, be aware of your personal savings allowance, because if you've got large pots of money elsewhere, then this additional interest might push you over that £1,000 limit if you're a basic rate taxpayer, or that £500 limit if you're a higher rate taxpayer. But as I said at the start of this piece, if you've got pots of money in cash at the moment, then dripping that across from an account into one of these won't beat the best fixed rate savings bonds. So bear that in mind. So moving on to our final piece, Andy, charitable giving at Christmas.
Yeah, again, this does date this podcast slightly in that obviously if you listen to this in the summer, then it's not relevant. But this is something that is relevant year after year come Christmas time. So look, cost of living, we know how much that is impacting people. So we're not suggesting by any means that everyone should go out there and gift money to charity. The idea of this piece in the pod is really just to highlight that there are options available to people. And it's not necessarily about giving money. There are other things you can do at Christmas. And the reason I particularly wanted to bring this piece to the pod is we as a family in the last couple of years have really started to realize how much rubbish we end up giving to each other as adults that we don't actually want. And it is wasteful. People are trying to save their pennies. And so we as a family have decided now, no more gifts for the adults. We're going to gift to the children, really just to help each other out and save a bit of money at Christmas.
When Andy says we as a family, he's not referring to me. He's talking about, we're not related. He's talking about his own family, don't you? So So my family, actually, we don't give gifts to the adults. So something that we stopped doing many years ago. We only give to the children. And it sounds simple, but once everybody's on the same page, it is such a relief because A, you don't have to go out shopping, which I hate doing anyway. B, it saves money and you can actually increase the value of some of the stuff you buy children. And we did that as a group of adults because obviously I've got quite a few siblings and it's made a massive difference and made Christmas more enjoyable because it's more about meeting up. Sorry, Andy, I hijacked your bit there, but that is something that is worth doing. If you've not done it this year, maybe next year. I tell you what, you'll be surprised how people will probably react in a family. Most people will be quite relieved that somebody suggests it, if I'm honest, because of the pressures people place on themselves more than anything. Sorry, Andy, carry on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Sometimes the best gift that you can give at Christmas is releasing others from the obligation of actually having to buy gifts. And like you say, it can be quite...
Did I just steal one of your tips?
No, not really. So what I'm going to do is just read out just a list of ideas for people that if they want to still do that token gesture, that gift to another without building up on all the tat that you tend to buy at Christmas, these are things that you could do that are charitable, that could really make a difference to other people. And again, it's not going to break the bank. And the ones I've picked out here are somewhere between £10 and £100 if you've got the money to do it. So a few of the charitable ideas that you could think about is UNICEF. They offer a package just for £18 where you can give vaccines for up to 100 kids to vaccinate against things like tuberculosis. I mean, impacting 100 people's lives for £18, that's not too bad.
So you could use this as say to somebody, don't buy me a gift, do this.
Yeah. Or the other way around, you could say, I didn't buy you a gift, I've done. They might not be as appreciative, but...
But yeah, I like it. So Karen, what's the second one?
With Oxfam, you can impact families by helping them to have clean water and sanitation. And that supports villages across the world. And that's from about £10. Macmillan, cancer obviously impacts a lot of people's lives. You can make a donation in someone's name from around £10. Save the Children do a number of packages from around £12 to £20 where you can give school bag kits, mosquito nets, essential baby kits that include nappies, towels and wraps and soap. And Refuge do a Christmas dinner parcel for £25 that can help support women and children that are escaping domestic violence. There's a few ideas there. I mean, you just need to search. In fact, we'll put a link to some ideas on the podcast article and in the notes on this podcast for a few ideas for you.
Yeah, and I remember years ago we talked about a charity that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore called Crack and Cider, which was set up by somebody I interviewed on the One Giant Leap podcast, where they set up a charity where you could gift warm clothing to homeless people. It was set up around Christmas time each year. So these are some quite nice alternatives if you are being charitable at Christmas with presents. So I like those ideas. Andy, anything else?
Yeah, just to finish off, obviously we've talked about things that you can buy and purchase for people who haven't necessarily got the money to do this, but they do want to give something at Christmas. There's a few things you can do. Obviously, look out for your elderly neighbours and family, offer to do the shopping, those kind of things. Giving up your time is just as good as giving money. You can volunteer at a local shelter. I know Lauren in the office, she probably wouldn't say it herself. She's done that in the past at Christmas and good on her for doing that. If you've got any vouchers sitting around that just laying around unused, you can do it on your Tesco points. You can do it on your Nectar points. You can actually go into your apps and donate to charities directly from there.
I really like that one, particularly for charities for people who obviously are struggling with the cost of living. So that is a very good one.
And actually, Damien, I know that's close to your heart, and you probably wouldn't say this, but Money to the Masses this year at Christmas donated to a local charity that helped deliver 611 Christmas bags that include things like toys, books, games to help local vulnerable children. And the money that Money to the Masses donated specifically went to supermarket vouchers to help those families. If you've got presents coming and you've got children and you want to clear out the children's bedrooms, have a look and see what you can give to local charity shops. They're always looking for donations. And I know anecdotally that they are busy this time of year. So unfortunately, you might actually be told that they are full and they can't accept any donations. Well, there is a solution to that. I had a quick look online, and Crisis, that are a homeless charity, has a free post service. So you can go online, request a label, they'll email it to you, which you can print off, and you can actually send items to them in the post up to 10 kilograms in weight, and that includes things like clothes and bric-a-brac. So if you can't get to a local shop, or if they're closed at the time that you do it, you can actually send stuff in the post to charity, which I think is amazing. And finally, Lidl are doing a campaign called Lidl Bears Toy Bank, and in every store nationwide, families can drop off new or unwanted toys and games, and they will get gifted to local children in need of support, which I think is really good. Of course, don't forget food banks. Oh, another thing on food banks, which is what I do at Christmas time, I do use some of my Nectar points to make sure that I can then give a little extra to the food banks when I'm doing my Christmas shopping. And another thing I do when I'm food shopping is I look around for the deals. If there's a buy one, get one free, and if it's something that I know the food bank might like, I'll purchase that, buy one, get one free, give it to the food bank. I'm still getting my food at the standard price. And so, yeah, food banks are a really good thing you can do at Christmas. The Trussell Trust is somewhere where you can go online and find a local food bank and check your local food bank to see the kind of items that they'll want. Okay, so that's a whistle-stop tour of all the things you can do that's charitable. I'm sure there's other ideas out there. In fact, if you've got some ideas that we've missed, please do mention it in the Money to the Masses Facebook group. Damien, that's it. We're done for this week, aren't we?
Yeah, we're done. As ever, don't forget to leave a review of the podcast. You've been very shy on reviewing the podcast of late, so please make sure you do. It would brighten mine and Andy's day and that of the rest of the team. So please do leave a review. And so that is it, Andy. Until next time.
Until next time.